Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson, and I'm joined today by someone with, you kind of mentioned the number, a tremendous amount of experience in weightlifting as a coach, as an athlete, as someone who's made a living in this space and done so very, very well. And has then been able to pass it on to other professionals, coaches, athletes, people who run their own clubs, and that is Leo Totten. Someone I think everybody will be familiar with, given the reach of East Coast Gold and Totten training systems and the impact he's had on the sport. Leo, I'm really excited to talk to you today and honored to be joined by you.
Thanks, Josh. I really appreciate it and love what you're doing and getting the word out. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, I think, I was about to make a comment before you were like, hey, we should start recording, because we were talking about training camps and just having a lot of time dedicated to, training intensely, learning more about technique, mental training. And I was going to say weightlifters are this unique breed, and Jacob Gooden actually mentioned it at the coaches college, which we both kind of reconnected at over the weekend in Johnson City, Tennessee. And he mentioned that and I think this goes for endurance athletes as well, he just loves training. I think endurance athletes just love training. Weightlifters just love training. And, the training as a sport, so to speak, of you can go in and you can max your snatch and clean and jerk. And that's nearly what you're going to see on competition day. A lot of caveats, a lot of things that go into that, making weight, traveling, having judges, lighting an actual clock rolling. But that's your walkthrough. That's basically your walkthrough in weightlifting, is going heavy in the snatch and clean and jerk. And the training is something that I think to kind of reach your potential and from any facet of weightlifting, from a coaching standpoint, athletic standpoint, from a professional standpoint, you should be in love with the training process. It's just something you should be taken in by. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show. You've experienced it over such a stretch of time in so many different contexts, and I find you to be a wealth of information. With that all being said, that's what today's episode is going to revolve around. And before we get into that, you did mention a coaching mentorship group that you have that'll be starting up in January. Could you give some information in case people listen to this podcast and like, holy cow, Leo is one of the smartest, most wise people I've kind of listened to in a really, really long time. I'd love to learn more, where they can find details.
It's very, very simple. Just Totten training systems. Then we've been doing this now for I think this is the 5th year we're launching this, and we call it the Totten Training Coaching Mentorship Program. And what we found over the years, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about who's actually involved in it. But what we found over the years is that sometimes when you do things on your own, it takes a lot of time, trial and error wise, to figure out things. Well, instead of young coaches getting out there and having to take the time and go through all those bumps in the road on their own, we try to kind of smooth that road for them. So what we've done is we've developed a 36 module course, and it's all online, and it's all about having a mentor along the way and having someone there to answer those questions. And the 36 modules that we've developed, one is a coaching theory section where there's like 12 different modules. And we talk about developing your own coaching philosophy, long-term athletic development, that sort of thing. And then we talk about technical training, where we get into specifics about teaching and learning the lifts, the snatch, the clean and jerk, of course, but also sprint training, plyometric training. And then finally, there's a third section, which my man Chris Tabor in particular does a lot with, and that's our training theory, where we talk about hypertrophy training, sprint training, how the body works, how that actually happens. So what we do is we have each person assigned a mentor, and it could be either Kate Finn or Chris Tabor or Cam Davidson. They're the 3 staff right now, and they cover 2 of those modules a week, where they literally get together with their mentor online and they talk about that week's two modules and discuss anything that. But I think even more than that is that the coaches that are taking that course, they have one-on-one with that mentor. So if they're in a high school situation or a collegiate situation or a sports performance gym, and they end up with, they're going to have questions about their situation. So that's what the mentor is there for, not only to go through the modules of that week, but also to discuss any issues they have, any problems they have, anything advancing. And if they don't have their answers from that mentor, the mentor knows where to go to find the answers.
Mm.
So this is just trying to make it as convenient as possible for the coaches to really develop that through this mentorship program. And then the fourth week, so we do that for 3 weeks. Then the fourth week, we have the full cohort meeting where everybody that's involved in the program, including all the mentors and including me, and we have a sit down full cohort Zoom meeting. Could be an hour, could be 2 hours, discussing anything they want to talk about. So basically just answering a lot of the questions that they pop up, and as you know, as training goes on, you don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers, but we certainly have a lot more than new coaches coming in. So we've been fortunate along the way to have really good mentors, and so this is a way for us to give back. And matter of fact, I'm doing a few little video clips of in the next couple weeks
Mm.
of some of the mentors I've had along the way, and you'll be surprised at some of the mentors. Not necessarily even weightlifting coaches, but
Yeah.
of course some are. But the first one I did was about my seventh grade basketball coach. Believe it or not, in seventh grade, I played basketball. I was about 2 feet tall, but I loved the game and worked hard. And this coach he was just such a phenomenal male role model. My dad wasn't around when I was growing up. So male role models, and in fact, female role models have been a big influence on me. And this guy, he understood I, g- I'm gonna do the best I can. I got the grit. I'm gonna work hard. I don't care if I'm the shortest guy out there. And he mentored me. And coach, next thing you know, I'm starting, playing well, and went through the eighth grade, still playing for him. Well, come ninth grade, everybody else is growing, and I'm still a little runt. So I started wrestling. So wrestling became my big thing. Had some good mentors there too. So again, just the main thing is that I've been very fortunate to have good mentors along the way. So just a great way to give back, and it's very fulfilling for sure.
Yeah.
So be on the lookout. It's gonna launch in January.
Yeah, that's and I'll if you have any links to provide more information or context, I can pop those in the description for people who are interested in checking it out. One thing, that struck with me when you mentioned all that, there are a couple things. One is the more you know or the more you learn, the more you realize you don't understand about like the way people may do things. So a good example is when like I'm interning with football here at WVU, and Coach Mike Joseph will have his program kind of written out, and he executes it all in a very specific way that makes sense to him and his, 2 decades of experience there. He has a program that he runs in a specific way, and I've all this training theory, background knowledge, weightlifting experience, powerlifting experience. And I still have all these questions, like why does he decide to do this, this versus that or X versus Y? Why does he organize sessions in this way? And you almost have more questions than if you kind of come in without that background knowledge, because you're like, oh, he's doing it all because it's going to create the best football players. Like, well, that's true, but also there are a bunch of reasons that are informed by his experience in a collegiate setting with, 100 plus athlete football team. Over so many years that have come to make this a really unique, individualized program. So the more I find I know, the more questions I have. We were talking about programming during lunch, and I was like, Leo, explain your programming to me, like talk through it. And I can kind of make sense of it, but I'm like, I want to know the details because that's all informed by your experience working with athletes, successful or not successful, and how that has then led you to create, you know, training structures, workout structures, that you can modify based on someone's needs or interests or, where they're at in their own career. So the more you realize, the more questions I think you end up having because you're just trying to make sense of all the information. Um, and then the next thing, I was at the facility yesterday and I was talking to one of the players and he was talking about um, maybe getting into coaching, and we were just kind of both talking about how coaches are great leaders, great mentors, role models. And you mentioned not having a dad growing up. I didn't really have a father growing up either, for my teenage years. And, a lot of that mentorship I've had to found later in life, or I've had to find later in life through, you know, people in athletics, people in weightlifting, people in academic space. Like I see Chris as, as a mentor. Like we're both kind of similar age, similar place. We're kind of like colleagues, but I also see him as a mentor in a lot of respects with the research process, scientific process, professional process, getting a job in academia. So having to then search for that or find that, I think athletics is like a natural fit for providing, yeah,
Mhm.
young kids with role models and mentors who can help them inform their own personal development and athletic development. You mentioned having a few. You mentioned you're a basketball coach in seventh grade. You mentioned getting into wrestling as a weightlifting coach. Someone who was in the performance space. Who have been other role models you've learned a lot from, gained a lot from, and you found to be really impactful in your own professional development?
Well, it's really hard to narrow that down to 1 or 2, I can tell you, because over the years, the mentors that you have, it just kinda it gets bigger and bigger, the whole scope of things. And you mentioned Chris Tabor,
Yeah.
and I know this is gonna sound weird, but I look at him as one that I have mentored, but at the same time, I look at him as being my mentor as well,
Mm,
because I'm still learning,
yeah.
especially some of the things with, technology and, the research and things like that, that I don't have as much background in, so I'm trying to learn more about that, so in a way, I consider him a mentor for me, and hopefully I've been a mentor for him along the way in some other capacity as well.
Yeah.
Um, well, dating way back, I know we had Kyle Pierce, that was one of the speakers at the, ETSU Coaches College this past weekend, and, well, Kyle. He's just a regular down home boy, really, really smart,
Yeah.
but just a really regular guy. And over the years, and I've known Kyle for, well, probably 50 years, and I've learned a lot from him. And a lot of times, I think the mentors don't even realize that they are mentoring people.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I see him. I see Lynn Jones from Australia, who came over to the United States and was our coaching education director for to get the whole thing started. I see those two guys as being very influential in my career development, and I see them as mentors. And and really, there's a bunch of others along the way. I mean, anywhere from Mike Catone, who's one of the USA coaches now. To, I mean, it's just so many people, and even at the high school level, Mike Schrock. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mike. He was the strength coach at Burns High School
Mm,
for years, and he's a legend in the high school strength and conditioning field. Burns High School, when he was strength coach there, he's recently retired, although he's still doing a lot of stuff. When he was the strength coach there, they had won multiple 5A state championships, and it was kind of cool how he set things up. Because I was at a high school for a lot of years too, and the way he set it up, the way he worked with his athletes, they literally started their weightlifting program in seventh grade, and they did it really well. Taught them the technique, made sure that all the positions were how they needed to be. So didn't throw a whole lot of weight on in seventh and eighth grade, but by the time they got to high school, ninth grade, they knew it. They just kind of hit the road running,
yeah.
and so just a lot of things that you learn from that. So in the high school setting, Mike Schrock was one of my, and he's still one of my best friends. We do a lot with the NHS SCA, and he was one that helped me get into the Hall of Fame there just this past
Wow.
year, which was really cool. So again, there's some really good organizations, and he's one that with that I have a lot of good friends and mentors from not only the weightlifting world, but also the high school and college strength and conditioning world. So I can't just narrow it down to one or two. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I imagine, Mike and Chris and Lynn and Kyle, they've all had such a big impact. And I think there's that like kind of peer-to-peer connection, which, you end up learning a lot from a person and just through the conversations and being around them. There's also that development that comes along with being an athlete of a coach and developing and that from that standpoint. And you mentioned, being in the sport for roughly 50 years, right? So starting in kind of like the around the 70s and being able to grow as an athlete, grow as a coach, and be around so many other people who have been in that space for, those different time periods. When you got into weightlifting, maybe you can kind of talk us through that journey of developing as an athlete and then who you learned under while you were competing in the sport and kind of, give as many details as you want. Cause I always love hearing about those stories of, lifting on metal plates and, performing the clean and press and what the demands on weightlifters were then versus maybe now when people have a different perspective of what the sport is.
Well, when I first started, I didn't realize there were demands on me. It just it was what it was, you
Right,
know?
right.
I guess ignorance is bliss, I guess
Sure.
is the way of figuring it out. But I, a lot of people have heard the story. Like I got my first set of weights when I was 12, and I've all kinds of stories with that. 5 foot exercise bar, not bumper plates. It was just an exercise bar. When the weather was cold, I was inside. I reconverted a clothes closet that was not very big, but just put a sheet of plywood down on the second
Yeah.
floor of the
Wow.
cheap apartment we lived in, and the bar was 5 feet long. The room was 6 feet wide, so I
Yeah.
had 6 inches on each side, 4 feet front to back,
Wow.
and I'm teaching myself,
Yeah.
mainly because I saw guys at York Barbell doing it,
Yeah.
teaching myself how to snatch and clean and jerk in that
Wow.
little confined space. And it was an exercise bar, so the plates didn't even spin unless I kept the collars loose.
Yeah.
So the plates spun, and not nearly what we have now. And then when it was warmer out, there was an old garage that had a dirt floor, and I would work out there on my own. I don't know what motivated me to do that. I was just trying to, not be a weak little guy. I just wanted to. I saw those guys lifting at York Barbell and said, "Hey, that looks pretty cool." So I
Right.
got Strength and Health magazine. I pretty much taught myself from sequence photos, and so in this dirt floor garage, I learned about deficit lifting just by trial and error.
Yeah.
Because every time the weight hit the ground, it got deeper and deeper and deeper. Next thing you know, I'm lifting off my shoe tops. So
Wow.
um, that experience, and then as I got a little bit older, training in different facilities that really didn't have a whole lot, had metal plates and all. So, what people have now, what the athletes have now, please don't complain. Man, you guys got it made compared to what we started with. And like you said, metal plates. And so dropping weights, that was really difficult because if you had a weight over your head, bring it here, then bring it to your lap,
Yeah.
and then bring it to the floor gently so it didn't kill the floor. And like you said, yeah, even back in the day, my first competition I was in I guess 11th grade, 10th grade. Yeah, 10th grade, I think it was. And yeah, they had the press at the time. I hated it because the press, as you know, became an Olympic press, not a military press. And I was never very strong. So my press was here, my snatch was up here, and my clean and jerk was up here.
Wow.
Most people, the press was up here, they didn't snatch as well, and then the clean and jerk was up. So they were the really strong guys, and I was the technician and the cerebral guy, and, so when they got rid of the press, I said, "Thank you very much. Now my back feels a lot better."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and it kinda shows my age there, but again, getting back to the mentorship, I pretty much coached myself for the
Yeah.
longest time. Now, I did have a coach, Tom Snellgrove, his name was, from New Jersey, from the Surf Breakers weightlifting club. Now, again, this is way, way back. I didn't know how long they existed. He saw me to meet, kind of took me under his wing and helped me a little bit. So I became part of their team from distance. kinda how East Coast Gold developed. I
Mm,
saw people that were in need from a distance and contacted me. So this started way back. 1992 is when I actually started East Coast Gold. So kind of relates back to that, believe it or not. But so as we went through, just the facilities got better. The gyms got better, the weights got better. So right now we're in a really good situation with weightlifting where a lot more equipment availability. Heck, even back in the day, getting lifting shoes was hard to find. They had it was a big deal back in the 70s to whenever you did an international trip to somehow find Russian weightlifting shoes. They're horrible. They
yeah,
they they didn't have any arch support. They had a slick rubber sole. They were not, but you had to have these because that was the cool thing because this is
yeah.
what the Soviets had. So I could go on and on and on. So any more specific questions might be a better way to go.
Yeah, and I think, this is a philosophical weightlifting podcast. I tend to talk a lot about training, training theory, programming, technique. We kinda get in the weeds with that. From a programming standpoint, you mentioned kinda coaching yourself for a long time. What was the training like? What kinda sessions would you do when you went in? Because I think we've gotten to this point where there is an interest in, yeah, tracking the number of reps you do, tracking the weight on the bar, having, a sequence to the exercise you use so that, one block feeds into the next one, which feeds into the next one. So you go from maybe general training, less specific, lower intensity to more specific, higher intensity, more, competition like training. And a lot of that's informed by work that Michael Stone did, and stuff Kyle Pierce has talked about, and what kind of like all the literature on periodization kind of discusses. When you were training, what did sessions look like? How were you piecing together workouts to improve and get better? And I guess I think that's interesting just to compare it to what we do today.
Well, what I did, was just study the Soviet manuals because that was the way to go, and this is even before the Bulgarians did their big thing in, I guess, early '80s, and, so I just studied those manuals. I can remember myself when I was, training myself, sitting at the dining room table, and I'm calculating all the percentages of lifts and all based off of all this Soviet, literature,
Yeah.
and figuring the K value and all these different things, and it was a lot of work. Again, I was motivated to do that, and I think that really helped me develop as a coach later on down the line to understand a lot of these principles and, just those Soviet manuals. I still have them. I think there's like 10 of them I have altogether, something like that, and, so I what I've really learned is that over time, there's always new stuff out there,
Mm,
but it always comes back to the old school stuff, what the research has proven, and I think a lot of times there's experts on the internet, so-called experts, that it's a new wave of doing things. Periodization works, research backs that up, and what you were talking about, starting at the beginning of a cycle, the volume is up and the intensity's down, and then as it progresses toward the contest phase, the volume drops and the intensity goes up. Pretty basic stuff,
yeah.
but it's backed by research, and I always get accused of being old school because I'm old, but the principles that we work off of
Yeah.
are based off of research, based off of successful lifting and competing, and so you can't go wrong with that, I think. So what's happened with me over the years, I've kind of evolved from back when I was training, I was trying to train 5, 6 days a week because that's what the training said to do, and, I would spend 2.5, 3 hours working out. Well, finding out that that's too long, you modify them from that. So some of those changes have happened, and heck, I would remember going through. I would drive to York Barbell twice a week when I was more serious about my lifting, and York Barbell was still a big deal at the time. And on Saturday, I'd leave the house at 9. Takes an hour to get there, train for 4 hours, be finished at 2 or 3, sit in their snack bar where they have protein shakes and protein bars and stuff, hang out there for a while, drive home, get home at 6 o'clock. So basically from 9 to 6 every Saturday, I would be
Wow.
there trying to soak up as much information, get my good training in. That's just crazy. But I was motivated to do that. But most athletes, not only are they not motivated to do that, but it's also not very smart,
Yeah.
you know? So I've adapted the training to, 1.5 hours, trying to keep it moving, trying to adapt to the physiological needs that have proven to work over time and, adjusting that way. And it still boils down to program design. I think sometimes people overthink it like I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think if we can the more you know, I think you should be able to simplify things.
Mhm.
So I think I try to have my athletes training 4, maybe 5 times a week because they're not in a training center environment. If it was a training center environment, train 9, 10 sessions a week. I get that. Most of the athletes I work with, they're working. All right. They don't they have full-time jobs. So I think a good coach is smart enough to adapt the training based on their situation because there's so many other things going on. Somebody I had a guy one time contacted me and he said, "Can you give me some advice? My clean is going down." Okay, I was doing 150 kilos. Now I can only do 142 or something like that. And I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about your training." And he said he had gotten a program off the internet. I know who the coach was, and I'm kind of surprised that he did this. I think he just gave him this generic workout and say,
Mm.
this is what all the top lifters do, so this is what you should be doing. He had him training 6 days a week. 3 days were double sessions,
Holy sh
squatting both days,
Yeah.
all the days, and he was tired. But I asked him about his home situation, his work situation. He said, "Well, he's in the military, working 60 hours a week, and at the end of each month, he had a strenuous physical fitness test that he had to do. He had a wife and 3 little kids, ages 5, 3, and 1, and I had said, 'When do you rest? When do you recover?' And he said, 'Well, I don't get a whole lot of rest.'" So that kinda answers your question right there. So, you take the basics that we d
Yeah.
had determined were gonna work, drop them down to 4 one-hour sessions a week. It doesn't sound like very much, but in his situation, his body was not adapting to all that heavy
Mhm.
stuff that he was
Yeah.
doing. So in his situation, that's what works for him. Still using the same principles, but adapted to his environment. Next thing you know, his clean's going back up again.
Mm.
It's not rocket science. We still keep it pretty basic, and I think sometimes people overthink things and try to make more of it than it is. I just try to simplify things.
Yeah. Well, and we were at the coaches college, and a lot of the conversations were around sports science and athlete monitoring and assessment. And I love weightlifting, and there's that great quote about the stopwatch doesn't lie, barbell doesn't lie. Like the weight on the bar is the weight on the bar, and that's your
Yeah.
performance. I mean, you can't. There's no work. There's no way to work around that. Like what you're capable of is what you do. And I love that because that means the when you're doing the right training for the person, you make progress. You improve. Your technique improves, the weight on the bar goes up. Like those are the ways you can say like the program's working the way we want. And yeah, there might be like fatigue and suppressed performance, but eventually the weight on the bar is going to be there. You're going to hit a PR in an exercise, a rep range, a complex, and you know you're on track to hit bigger lifts at a competition. So I like that weightlifting is a very transparent sport. Powerlifting is a very transparent sport. If you're doing the right training, you'll know that. So I love that aspect about it. And sometimes you're right, it can get really sciencey and sophisticated. But I think if you come back to that basic idea of we'll structure training in a way that either we know it's working or we know it's not working, and then we can go from there. One thing I find interesting, and maybe you can comment on this, is that a lot of the coach education we have in weightlifting is pretty founded on the Russian manuals. Like a lot of people reference that as, hey, have you read the translations from Bud Charnaga? That is where, we've learned how to program or learned how to write training. And um, a lot of that still holds. And I think there's definitely a lot of caveats there, like the amount of volume they were doing, session size and structure can be modified because they were working with athletes over a really, really broad amount of time. Obviously, no doping control at the time they were written.
Yeah.
So there are
That's
a
a
lot of
nice way of putting it.
yeah, there are a lot of things to consider, but at heart, the manuals where they describe technique, like great. I love those. I learned so much about how to move a barbell reading those, and then how to program. It was almost more confusing reading them because their logic was very founded on the principles of training of volume should do something certain, like volume should change in a certain way, intensity should change in a certain way, so they would like move exercises around, have different sets and reps, and it'd be it'd almost feel very complicated. Um, so it was always hard for me to figure out. And then I kind of realized, oh, they're just taking exercises out to reduce volume, putting exercises in to increase volume, doing, 4 by 6 and then 7 by 3 to manipulate volume and intensity. And you don't have to do it that way. And, you probably don't need to complicate it that much. But there are a lot of like you mentioned, basic principles of training baked into all of that stuff. Um, and I feel like it hasn't changed a ton, maybe just becoming more individual to the person and their circumstance. So, if someone struggles with leg strength and they get really gassed by the time they get to squats, maybe squat first in a session, and that helps them, approach it from a place where they can have more intense training and more weight on the bar, more reps, more sets. And then that's going to drive their squat up more than if they squatted after, say, doing, like an overhead squat, a snatch, a pull, and then they squat. The weight on the bar is going to be lower, so less absolute intensity. Um, so I think they're like those individual considerations, but you're right. It comes down to those foundational principles that we kind of know to hold true through the decades, that haven't changed a ton. So that's always like a refreshing thing to hear from my standpoint too, is like I don't need to overcomplicate it. I just need to take what I know and apply it really well.
I think that's what it boils down to, and applying it to that individual, situation. Getting back to the squats, back in the day, my weak area, and I talk about this all the time. I think athletes have to be disciplined enough to work on what they're not good at.
Yeah.
What's their limiting factor, so to speak, is what I call that. What's holding them back? And always talk about it's got to be you got to have a good technique, you got to have flexibility to get into the correct positions, and you got to have enough strength to hold those correct positions. So when I was training back in the day, really good technique because I taught myself and I was told I had very good technique. I'm still considered a technique coach. I had good flexibility. Heck, even when I snatched, I would touch my butt on the floor, which, by the way, is illegal, but it's kind of tough to call that.
Yeah.
But so flexibility wasn't my issue. I just had to get stronger.
Mm,
So once I got my squats up, then my lifts started going up. It's a ratio thing that everybody's aware of, and so that's one of the things that I had to take into consideration for what I was doing. And like you're saying, when I had my squats at the end of the workout, I was too tired to actually benefit like I wanted to from that. So when I was at school, what I would do is I would do my squats over my lunchtime and then come home and finished up. So I was doing double sessions, but it's pretty much one workout just
mhm,
broken
yeah.
up into 2 sessions. If I tried to do any more than that, I wouldn't have been able to adapt to that and respond to that. But that really helped my squats go up. And once the squats went up, the lifts started going up. So this is one of the things that I think a lot of times coaches have to understand. They have to be good motivators.
Mm,
You have to motivate your athlete to do what they don't want to do.
yeah.
What they wanna do and what they need to do are 2 different things. So as a coach, you have to motivate them to do what they need to do. So if they're I'm always talking about ratios, your snatch should be about 80% of your clean and jerk. Well, if your snatch is 70% of your clean and jerk, that just tells you what you need to work
Mm,
on more.
yep.
And what part of the snatch is holding you back? Is it the overhead strength? Do you need to work on that? Is it the speed of the bar? Is it the technique? Are they better at power snatch than full snatch? Those things you take into consideration. That's what you set up your training for. This is where the individualization really pays off when you're putting programs together, I think. What's their weak area? What do they need to work on? And go from there.
Yeah, and I think if you don't individualize training enough, sometimes you get caught in this place where you do like one thing I've kind of had to be better about is I'll give someone training that is like more traditional weightlifting training. So you actually mentioned the Bulgarians coming on the scene in like the 80s, and that influenced, wow, that influence, I don't know the influence in weightlifting today. I feel like it's much less, at least like American weightlifting. But there was a point in time where it felt like that kind of reigned supreme as the Bulgarians trained this way. It was very effective for them, and that could be debated. And then it's like, okay, so we should train like that too. We should snatch and clean and jerk more often, the classic lifts from the floor, maybe have power sessions. I mean, like, when I would talk to Glenn about training, he was really influenced by the Bulgarians and West Side. So they would have sessions, I think probably once a week, where he would maybe once uh, a certain exercise or different exercises. Um, So they were really influenced by the Bulgarians. When I got into weightlifting, that's kind of what I kept hearing as you should train intensely, you should snatch and clean and jerk from the floor often. And when you do that, everything else kind of falls to the wayside a bit. The strength work, any just general like conditioning work, any body part specific accessory work, any technique work. So you'd have a session structure, would probably be snatch, clean and jerk, pull, squat, and then maybe the next day it's like a power snatch, power clean and jerk, maybe do some overhead lift, and then that would kind of repeat. Now it's to the point where it's like, yeah, as you mentioned, if someone's legs aren't strong, you should probably prioritize that and maybe do that at the start of a session. If their technique's not very good, maybe you should have more exercise that target the phase of the lift they struggle with. So one thing I see that's pretty common is the use of the upper body once the barbell leaves the hips or thighs. People might not stay engaged to the bar as they're pulling into the squat. The bar might loop out, it might kind of crash overhead. So I like to go with like a no contact muscle snatch or, like a no feet snatch or maybe some power variation to help them stay connected after they use their legs to move the bar up. But if you don't, have a program with enough of that in there, you won't really improve at those phases of the lift or those aspects of the lift. So you have to
So
do.
you're talking about working on your limiting factors.
That's right. That's
That's
right.
what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that, kind of resonated with me and eventually you kind of realize it, is that you have to do enough of it to improve, and it should be obvious, that their technique's better or their legs are stronger. And if those things aren't happening, it's like the training needs to be modified and individualized even more to accommodate for that. So I guess it's a lesson you learn as a coach eventually. It's like just being influenced by the time isn't enough. You need to be able to take those skills and what works generally and apply it to the person
Well,
who.
and you learn from that. I mean, like when you're talking about the Bulgarian system, what in basic terms, what they were talking about was like 6 workouts in a day. And what they would do is they would go, excuse me, they would go snatch up to really heavy weights, world record weights, then take a 45-minute break or so. And then they'll do the same thing with the clean and jerk, really heavy, world records, and then take a little break. And then squat, really heavy, take a little lunch break, take a nap, take their drugs, whatever, and then come in the afternoon and do the same thing. Well, Americans would look at that and say, well, they're setting world records and they're winning gold medals. We need to train like that. Got to simplify everything. Just snatch, just clean and jerk, just squat. That's enough. Well, you got to take it into context here. Okay. What they were doing, well, first of all, they didn't do that year round. They only did that peaking for a meet, and they only did it with their elite athletes. And their elite athletes had gotten to the point where, excuse me, they could handle that sort of thing because they had that wide base of training as a younger lifter. And eventually they could get closer and closer to doing that as their experience and their abilities got better. And they were in a political situation, a cultural situation where these top lifters, if somebody got hurt, because that's pretty intense, if somebody got hurt, go away. Next,
Mhm.
who's next in line?
Yeah.
Not to mention the drugs. You can't do that drug free. So you have all those factors entering into it. Now, if you want to use a little bit of that training for a week or two, just a little mini cycle, I do that occasionally. Okay. But it can't be long term. And it wasn't long term for them either. It was only at certain times. So all of these things you have to take into context, and it really boils down to, can a program like that work in a drug-free environment like we're advocating? Okay. If it can't work in an environment like that, then maybe look at it, but that's about it. I don't
Mhm.
think we need to really push that type of training if we can't do it in a drug-free environment, which is what we have to do.
Yeah, and I think, I do get questions every so often, and they're hard to answer. They're really difficult questions to answer because people reach out and say, "Hey, what are the best resources for learning to write a program or learning to, create programs?" I'm like, "That's a really difficult ask for me to provide a resource because, as you mentioned, you learn all of that through your own experimentation. You learn all of that through all of the research articles, all of the books, everything that's kind of written, podcasts, conversations. Like you pick all that up, and eventually you're like, okay, I think I can write something that makes sense. But there's no point where you're like, oh, this thing helped me figure it out. From your experience and your standpoint, you were able to read all the Russian manuals, live through the proliferation of the Bulgarian system, so to speak, work with all these great coaches, also coach all these great athletes, like fantastic athletes. And, we didn't even mention your accolades at the
What?
start, which,
Okay.
would require probably a separate podcast in and of itself just to talk about what you've done, what you've achieved. But from your side or from your standpoint, what are some of the resources you found most helpful for being able to write effective programs or write effective training?
Well, and I think this is one of the things that is my strength as a coach. One of my strengths, the program design. What I found is that there's basics that work for everybody. I don't care if you're a novice lifter or an advanced lifter or a football player using our type of training. When I say our type, weightlifting training, volleyball, all the principles are the same, and then you adapt and individualize based on all those other stresses in their life, what the other things are going on. And I think that really helped me where, because I've seen a lot of really generic programs, and I think a lot of coaches are getting rich off of these things, by the
Yeah,
way.
they are.
Somebody says, well, here's your workout. And it's not that easy. One just a little side story here. I had a dad one time, who approached me, and he said his 12-year-old son is a really good baseball pitcher, 12-year-old old now. He's gonna get a scholarship. He should make the pros, and oh, this guy was pushing his kid like crazy. And so he said, "You're a really good weightlifting coach. Can you make him a program for weightlifting?" And I'm thinking, well, there's a lot more involved than that. I think he thought I was gonna go to the old filing cabinet, open a drawer, pull out a baseball workout and say, "Here you go." That's not how I do things. Okay. What I did, I started asking him questions. I said, okay, is he right handed? Is he left handed? Does he play any other sports? Does he play baseball year round? What kind of fitness does he do now? So I asked him all these questions. And the last question I asked him, and it should have been the first question, I made that mistake. I asked him, I said, does he really want to do this? And the dad hesitated. He goes, yeah, yeah, he wants. So I knew
Yeah.
he didn't even ask the kid. But anyway, I said, okay, I'll take my time. I'll get together a 6 month real nice program for him based on those individual needs, still based on the basics, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
individualized for his needs. Spent 2 hours getting this 6 month program together. He did one workout, said it was too hard, scrapped it, moved on to something else. So anyway, but overall though, that
Yeah.
I found that to be the successful way to doing it. You stick to the basics, okay? Everybody needs, I don't care what sport you're working with, everybody needs to squat, to pull, to put a weight over your head. Everybody needs that. But how they do it, that's where you individualize. And that seems to be successful. And the programs that I do and I do online program if anybody's interested, by the way. I don't do it for a whole lot of people. I only
Yeah.
do it for a few, not I don't say a few, but more than a few. But I pride myself in the fact that nobody gets the same workout. I
Mm.
don't care if they're the same weight class, lifting about the same weights, they won't get the same workout. Similar, but not the same because everybody's individual weaknesses, we try to hone in on those. and their competition schedule varies. So within that, then we individualize. And I think that's really the important part. But still got to stick to the basics. The basics work. They're backed by research. They're backed by experience. And I know a lot of lifters are doing a lot of crazy things, but if it's working for them, that's fine because
Yeah.
again, it's individualized for them. So that's that's been my philosophy for my own training back in the day, and well, to my own training even right now. I still work out. I don't train. Training means you have a goal in mind. My
Yeah.
goal is to stay healthy and get out of bed without creaking and and making all kinds of noises, which I can't. Don't go heavy anymore.
Yeah.
I always tease the fact that, well, back in the day, I snatched 150 kilos. Well, now you put that on the bar, I can roll it really well, and that's that's about it. So
Yeah.
my training has changed, but we still work out based on different individual needs.
Yeah, and I mean, a
I
lot of
kind
the
of got rolling on that. I'm sorry.
no, that was perfect. I mean, a lot of the questions, you know, because a podcast is it's like a really contained, you know, uh, bit of information where it's like we just kind of talk about the highlights, we talk about general principles, things that kind of make sense, and then people have to then take that and either run with it or they can take it and apply it directly. I like a little bit of both. We talk about, you know, when programming for an athlete, it is about their longer term development. So you like I've written even right now, I have a powerlifter who's competing at the world level for the first time, and I think she's on like a 23-week program or something like that. It's like, okay, so you know, it's not just a quick like 6-week fix for something. It's like, okay, from start to finish, we have very specific goals, and that is saying intensity climb, that is seeing volume kind of wave around,
Yeah.
and that is seeing exercises change strategically to get more weight on the bar, to put more demands on certain parts of the body. It's like, okay, there's like a long-term rationale to it. So I think people listening will pick up on that. Things I also like to do would be to talk about, you know, things that have stuck out as kind of really helpful changes to programs. So I mentioned, you know, general technique exercise I like would be a muscle snatch. I think those generally help emphasize the upper body's action in, you know, snatch or a clean, muscle snatch, muscle clean. I like, you know, maybe pulls that emphasize being over the bar. I like pulls that maybe emphasize getting the knees to the right position when the bar breaks the floor and moves to the knee so that the shins are vertical, shoulders are on top of or in front of the bar, and they're holding a really strong position. From your standpoint, do you have, you know, your kind of go-to exercises or programming styles that, you know, people can take and then think, okay, within my framework, how could I apply this to benefit the athletes that I work with?
Yeah, well, what I do is I look at the long term, all right, and then I break it down into typically 4-week mesocycles because what I find is that if you set up an entire 16-week program and have everything planned out, which I do, okay, but I only send them 4 weeks at a time just because stuff happens during that cycle and we need to make changes. So my week 1 to 4 is hopefully going to lead into weeks 5 to 8 with a certain thing in mind. But stuff may have happened in that first 4 weeks that I have to make changes within that 5 to 8 week cycle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I just find that it's almost like the whole method of how we teach technique. You teach what the whole lift looks like, then you break it down into parts, and then you put it all back together.
Mm,
I look at the assistance exercises as doing the same thing. Early on, we say, all right, this is what the clean pull should look like. And but if they have a weak starting position or if they have a weak, most people were very weak from the floor to the knees. I
mm,
really emphasize that just because people are pretty weak posterior chain, so they tend to use the quads and that bar drifts forward. We don't want that. Now, if somebody's a really strong squatter, if you look at the research that's out there, some people right off the floor, the bar moves forward and they pull it back. Usually they're the stronger lifters, like big squats, and they have, you know, strong quads, and they're able to do that. Most athletes, we want that bar coming back right away. And so that pull from the floor to the knees it's pretty crucial. So we'll break that down. We'll do a lot of liftoffs, or we'll do a lot of pull to the knees and hold 2 or 3 seconds, and then
Mm,
finish the pull. So, we break it down and isolate parts of the move early on. And then as it goes through, hopefully we can incorporate all that into the full movement, and it's gotten stronger. So that's really what I try to do. You mentioned muscle snatches. I very seldom use muscle snatches because a lot of times people do them wrong, and a lot of times people don't need them. The
yeah,
only time I do muscle snatches if people have a tendency to swing the bar out at the top.
yeah,
Maybe they're tight in the shoulders, and instead of getting up here,
yeah,
they're here because they're tight in there and that bar swings out. We don't want that horizontal movement. We want the vertical movement. So that teaches them to keep that bar close, right in by the face and press.
yes,
And it's nothing more frustrating to watch somebody on the internet say, "Oh, I have a new record muscle snatch." And then you watch how they do that, and it's like, it's one of the ugliest lifts I've ever seen. It doesn't really correlate to what
yeah,
you're trying to do. Snatch balances is another one. Drives me crazy. What
yeah,
is a snatch balance supposed to do? It's supposed to teach you the speed and timing going under the
yeah,
bar so you meet the bar at the bottom. So what you see somebody doing a record snatch balance, they'll do a push jerk and then an overhead squat.
yeah,
That's not the exercise,
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
So I try to make the exercises as specific to the movement as possible because the whole goal is to make a better snatch and a better clean and jerk. If what you're doing is get you stronger in different positions, it's not really doing you any good. So I try to relate it as much to the lift as possible, but break it down and then put it back together, whether it's teaching technique or getting stronger in those positions.
yeah. What about, so you mentioned the snatch and you mentioned the clean, how you like partial pulls or maybe like a pull with a pause at the knee. And I found that to be the case too. It's really difficult for people to hold a good like torso position as they stand up. And it's
Correct.
also hard for them to get the knees back to the right position and then to hold it and be really, really strong there. Um, so I like that. That kind of fits the way I think about, the way I program too. With the jerk, how do you approach teaching, ingraining, and strengthening the technique of the jerk?
Again, you look and see what's their problem.
Yeah.
Is the problem the dip? One of the things I think a good coach, when they develop a good coach's eye, will develop is that what's the cause of the problem? All right. So for me, when it's the pull, cause of the problem is usually something right off the floor. As a
Mm,
matter of fact, this weekend I was working with Martin a little bit at
yeah.
ETSU, and I said, Send me a video of the snatch," and he did, and he's jumping back about this far. I'm going, "This is not what we want. Okay, we want it more vertical and possible."
Yeah.
And I looked at it like twice, and I slowed it down. I said, "You see what you're doing off the floor? You're pulling back immediately off the floor." So I said, I fixed his start. Next thing you know, he's pulling vertical, and I said, "Look, you're probably not going to fix this at the heavier weights yet, but drill it with the lighter weights, and
Yeah.
eventually those heavier weights will get much much better." And I'm okay with jumping back this far,
Yeah.
not this far.
Yeah.
So that was the cause of the problem. So that's the same thing with the jerk. I look and see, um, is it the overhead strength? Is it, and usually it's the dip. Okay. They dip too fast or they dip and drop the elbows and pushes everything forward. So I like to do a lot of dip holds where they're in that correct position. So the weight should be distributed a little bit closer to the heels for the jerk and, not too deep, not too shallow. Usually the dip is the problem. So that's a lot of the work. Or I'll have them do split jerks with the hold and
Mhm.
then finish the lift. If they're pushing it forward, we do a lot of power jerks
Okay.
because it's kind of tough to do a power jerk and not walk forward.
Yeah.
As long as you're pushing it straight up, you're pretty good to go. So that's me with the jerk. And then the split position, I try to emphasize to get that front foot out so the front shin is vertical and the weight's balanced on both legs. Okay, if everything's shifted forward, and you're walking forward, no good. If you can recover with your front foot first, that means you're balanced pretty good for the most part. So I could get really technical and go on and on. But I think a good coach, the more you develop a good coach's eye, you can figure out what the cause of the problem is.
No, I agree. And I think that's such a really insightful point. And I think, um, having a process for identifying those issues and then saying like, oh, here are exercises that specifically target them. We know how to program them, put them in, and then help people work through them. So you're right. Eventually, all of it kind of comes together. And that like coming together point is generally when people PR and they're kind of surprised by it, like, wow, yeah, suddenly one day things just kind of clicked, felt really good, was able to work up really heavy and smash a PR. And a lot of that is like being intentional with lighter weights, being intentional with doing movements correctly. And then as, the weights on the bar go up, being able to maintain those changes, those adjustments. And then suddenly you're like, yeah, you kind of break through that wall. And that wall is purely, from my standpoint, I'm not the strongest guy, so that wall is like a strength plateau. But for other people, it might be more of like a technical plateau where they would just like, yeah, dip it in, their hips would kind of roll underneath them and shift them forward, and the bar would kick out and kind of cut their drive short. So I always
I like
loved,
the word I like the word intentional that you mentioned.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Every lift that you do should be intentional. Every lift should be the same. I've seen people do power cleans or power snatches and they don't move their feet. Why
mm,
don't you move your feet? When you clean or when you snatch in competition,
yeah,
don't you move your feet? Why wouldn't the power or snatch or power clean be the same? So you don't really need to. Yeah, you do because you're trying to develop one pattern no
mm,
matter what the lift is. Same thing with any movement that you do. Your 50% lift should look the same as your 90% lift. And a lot of times, even, and this drives me crazy, and I know this is just a little idiosyncrasy of mine. The bar's on the floor, and you have to get it up on the rack to do your squats. You've just finished doing your
yeah,
cleans, and now you have to put it up on the squat rack to do your squats. And it's a reverse curl up to here. Drives me crazy. Make it a good clean,
yeah,
then put it on
yeah,
the rack.
yeah,
Why do sloppy stuff? And then not only are you teaching your body the wrong positions, but you're also putting yourself in a chance for injury. How many times have we gotten little tweaks and stuff doing the dumbest little
mhm,
things?
yeah.
All it takes is one little thing. So every lift should be the same. Every lift should be intentional. I like that word. I get to use that more often now. Thanks for that, Josh.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's
I'll
it's kind
credit you for that word.
I appreciate it. It's kind of funny thinking about that. I'll watch because I work with high schoolers, and I'll watch them do like a perfect set of clean deadlifts, like a perfect set. I'm like, all right, we're like making good progress. And then we have the spotter arms on racks that kind of come out, so they'll set the bar on and change weights, and then I'll watch them pick the bar up off the floor to put on the spotter arms, and it's completely different. And
That drives me crazy.
it's like, whoa, we gotta maintain that standard, kind of from top to bottom. So when I clean weights up, like I enjoy it because I'm like, okay, I get to use my technique I've developed over all these years and make this feel crisp and fast, and it looks impressive, it feels good. So I get excited by it, but kind of watching people kind of like, I'm working on technique now and then I'm not later, and there you can see that obvious switch. It's something you have to be aware of.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
working on technique all the time.
You're working on technique all the time, which is why I
I
think, yeah, good.
I've heard a coach, one coach in particular, I won't say who it is, and he said, once you get to technique, don't worry about technique anymore. Just get strong. I'm like, no, you got to be tweaking technique all the time. Even if somebody, say we're working on lifts from the power position, but the bar is on the floor. So I will say, okay, good deadlift. All
Yeah.
right, now get into your power position. But I
Mhm.
always say good deadlift because ultimately it's going to be an ugly thing and that defeats the purpose. So
No, I like that. And going back to Tim Sukamel's talk at Coaches College, he talked about strength being a skill. And you realize that like, yeah, we can focus on getting stronger, but getting strong is a skill because it's expressed through technique. So if your
yeah,
technique isn't, accommodating that newfound strength, it's gonna be a different movement. Which is why it's always kind of a work in progress and kind of maintaining the two, being able to make, bar speed what you want, being able to hit the positions you want, timing you want, which always becomes a bit more challenging as you get bigger and bigger weights on the bar because it wants to pull you out of position. It wants to move
yeah,
you around even more. So, that totally makes sense to me. And, I had a ton of fun kind of talking through these, aspects of coaching and training and mentorship. Um, just to remind people, if they do want to check out the mentorship group you have coming up in January, where can they go to find out more information?
it's easy. My website, tottentraining.com. And I think that's one of the things that I always like to point out to people. They don't realize a lot of the stuff I have going on. Once I retired from school a long time ago, I was able to put together this little training system business that I have, and we do a lot of different things. We have this mentorship program. We do program design. We do a little bit of everything, and check out even the social media. I'm
Mm,
not good at that, but I have
yeah.
Kate Finn as my right-hand man. I tell you, she's my marketing person. She's really good. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have X, we have just check out what we do. Every Tuesday, I have my Tuesday Tottenisms.
Mm,
Every Thursday, I have Throwback Thursday. So talk a lot about some of the history of back in the 70s and 80s, reviewing old Strength and Health magazines, stuff like that. So there's a lot social media that we have going on, and everything is at tottentraining.com. It's really pretty easy.
yeah, sounds simple to find. And one thing you pointed out, and I don't want to drag this podcast on any longer than kind of planning to, but you mentioned learning from basically still frames, and it's not like a like a weightlifting house sequence where it's every single shot, every single frame, and you can see the lift in detail. You mentioned there's like 3 pictures, and you're trying to figure out the technique, of a snatch or a clean or a jerk with like 3 pictures of the movement and how difficult that could be. So I think some of that background is really helpful because yeah, a lot of the great coaches, in weightlifting, yourself, Kyle Pierce, um, who have been doing it for a really long time, like it wasn't always as simple as, you put out a bunch of great content now, courses, mentorships, seminars, clinics, training camps, so you can learn firsthand, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, things hadn't been out there. So I think that's one of the things I really like about our society now is that there is a lot of good information out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of crap too. I mean, if you go on the internet, there's a lot of stuff on there that's really good, and hopefully the content that I put out there is really good. But there's also a lot of stuff that people put on without the background, without the research backing it up. And so I think the more educated people become, and that's what we try to do with our seminars and our clinics and our content that we put out there, just trying to make you more educated so you can figure out, hey, this makes sense.
Mm,
This has been proven to work over the years. Research backs it up. It's not just some guy out there claiming to be a genius on something when really what's the background? So I think that's one of the things we really try to do is just get good information out there. And the courses that we do, I teach USAW courses, the level 1 and the level 2. I teach as a matter of fact, 2 weekends from now, I'm doing a level 1 at Westchester University. If anybody's still interested, who
yeah.
happens to hear this, so there's some signups. I'm even in the process of putting together my I call it my Totten Olympic Lift Cert Level 1,
Mm.
and it's hands-on. It's an 8-hour teaching the clean, the snatch, the jerk, assistance exercises, video analysis, and I'm actually in the process of making that an online course now.
Oh,
So
wow.
again, we're just trying to get out as many different avenues of education as we can, to kind of spread the word about doing things the right way. Which,
Yeah.
by the way, is one of my mottos, okay? Especially with our team, East Coast Gold, Phil Sabatini, and the whole crew. We do the right thing for the right reasons with the right people. So hang out with good people and do the right thing. You'll do okay.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And then, one thing I wanted to kind of back up, which is a good way for me to kind of know if someone's pushing something that's beneficial or not is how does this fit into the grand scheme of how I develop athletes, people, how I train, how I train and coach. If it's just like if it's just kind of like an oddity, it's just like a random thing that kind of doesn't make any sense. It's like it's probably not worth my time. If it's something that can fit my process and improve my process, then I should probably look into it. So I think all these like hacks and weird tricks and just it doesn't make any sense, and it's just meant for views, clicks, attention, business, versus, kind of what we end up gravitating to, which is how do you develop your process? How do you improve your process? How do you use the principles well? How do you coach people through long stretches of time? It's not What's that one weird trick? Even when we talk about that one weird exercise, it's always contextualized with who needs it? How do you implement it? How do you progress it? How does it fit into an actual plan? So I think that's a generally good way to distinguish kind of what's worth listening to than what's not. Even with nutrition, it's like all the talk about random supplements or random hacks, how does that fit into someone's actual diet, which is how they eat, over the days and weeks and months and years, and how does that fit their, food environment and their socioeconomic status? It's all this stuff's way more complicated than one fix or one hack. So Leo's stuff, the East Coast Gold stuff, Totten training systems, always a good way to cut through silly BS. So if
Right.
anyone listening is interested in checking that out, please do. If you want to follow me, that's Philosophical Weightlifting on Instagram, philosophicalweightlifting.com. You can find all of my stuff there. Support the brains that sponsor the podcast, onxstraps.com for this crafted by Reps crew neck. Go to Weightlifting House, use code PhilWL for 10% off. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning into the podcast, and we will catch you all in another episode next week.
Thanks.